I want to thank St. Vrain Valley School District, Boulder Valley School District, the NAACP Boulder County Branch, the Town of Erie, and Alicia Graves, who I will introduce in a moment, for your help and coordination to make this event happen. We are so excited to have Dr. Allen here with us this evening. Tonight's topic is more important than ever. We need to talk to our children early and often about race, inclusion, and the value of diversity. For many of us, these conversations are not easy and we don't know where to start, and that's why we're here tonight, to help give you a starting point for talking with your children or other children about race. Sorry, my dog is barking in the background. One amazing Erie resident, Alicia Graves, is behind this wonderful series we are about to kick off tonight. And I say kick off tonight every time, sorry, I forget to change that from my script, but this is the first night for the middle school. So essentially we're kicking off the middle school topic tonight. Alicia brought this idea to the town, the school districts, and the NAACP Boulder County Branch and turned her idea into reality. Alicia was involved in the Being Better Neighbors March, the creation of Erie's Police Task Force, the creation of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Advisory Board, and placing DE&I committees within Erie schools. She is a member of the Professional Standards Review Panel and also serves as the chair of the Education Committee of the NAACP Boulder County Branch. She has lived in Erie for 5 years with her husband and 2 young boys. So with that, please welcome Alicia Graves.
Thank you, Mayor Carroll. My name is Alicia Graves, and I am an Erie mom and chair of the NAACP Boulder County Education Committee. I'd like to start by sharing a story about why it is so important that our community comes together to begin this dialogue about race. My oldest child is in preschool. When we recently began in-person learning, I, like most of you, worried about the increased risk of COVID. But more than COVID, I was afraid of what kids would do and say to him as a child in a school with less than a dozen Black students. The reason I felt so afraid, especially this year, is that I was unable to enter the building with him. Last year, as I would walk him to his classroom, I'd notice white children stop and stare at him. Before COVID, I could walk with him and shield him from their stares. Now I am not able to leave the car. My protection ends in the parking lot. I have seen kids who don't want to sit next to him or share their toys or who run away when he comes near. I've watched a child refuse to touch him because they thought his skin was dirty. A week after going back to school, his preschool teacher told me he made a new friend. She told me about the little girl who approached him, introduced herself, and asked to be best friends. Every morning, as his teacher pulls him from my car, I watch this little girl reach her arms out for my son. I rarely see them apart. She is constantly by his side. She is the shield I am not able to be. I later learned that her family had already introduced the concept of race to their children. It was not a coincidence that their daughter was comfortable befriending my son. He wasn't new to her because her family had already talked about race with their children. What I hope you gain from my story and these conversations is that our children are learning about race and forming biases at an early age. Who else besides you do you want to teach your children about race and racism? If we aren't talking with our children, we have no voice in shaping their understanding. Do you want your children to be a shield or the reason someone doesn't want to be their beautiful selves? Our speaker for this series is Dr. Rosemarie Allen. Dr. Allen earned her BA from California State University, Long Beach, her Master's of Education from Lesley University, and her doctorate in Equity and Leadership in Education at the University of Colorado, Denver. She is currently an associate professor in the School of Education at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Dr. Allen has served as the director of the Division of Early Learning and in Youth Corrections with the Colorado Department of Human Services. Dr. Allen also serves as the president and CEO for the Institute for Racial Equity and Excellence, which is the lead agency for ensuring equity in educational practices throughout the nation. She is a national expert on implicit bias and culturally responsive practices, speaking at conferences across the country. We are honored to have you with us for this series, Dr. Allen. Please join me in welcoming our speaker this evening.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here. I'm excited we didn't have to cancel. You know, the snow, I don't know about where you are, but we have about 2 feet outside without drifts. And I was so afraid of not having power or something happening, but I am so very happy to be here. I'm just curious, how many of you either have a middle schooler at home or a teacher? Just put it in the chat box for me. Teacher, mom, dad, whatever. I just want to get an idea. Okay, teacher and mom, both. Oh my goodness. Okay, and the reason I asked, this is really, really amazing. I support middle school teachers, principal. Okay, wonderful. Very diverse group here. My specialty, my heart is actually in early childhood. And when I was a teacher, people always said, how do you do it? How do you do it? 3-year-olds are awful. I couldn't do it. And by comparison, I always wonder, how do you do it, middle school folks? How do you do it, middle school teachers? And then I realized something. We deal with the same behaviors. A 3-year-old has exactly the same behaviors as a 13-year-old. You heard them, have you heard the term three-nagers? But they're just taller and they have more words. And heaven help anyone here who happen to have a toddler and a middle schooler, because you're getting like a double whammy. You know, I think a lot about this, how 2-year-olds, you all remember that stage, terrible twos, everybody warned you about them, and favorite words in their vocabulary, no, stop, don't, mind. But you know, you think about your 12-year-old, they just say it differently, but no, stop, don't. It's mine, my room, my stuff, my things, my friends. In the same way with 3s, you remember 3-year-olds who were far worse than 2s, but nobody told you, where they would try you every second of the day. Same way, you all know what the 13-year-olds are, and 4-year-olds know everything, will argue with a wall. Sound familiar with your 14-year-olds? Yeah. So anyway, we're all in this together. I'm really, really excited to talk to you about talking to children in middle school about race. Oh, I'm just looking through the chat box. Principals, mental health interventionists, moms, and how awesome is it that we are all coming together for this discussion. And I love it so much because by having your school personnel, your principals, your teachers, and your parents, we have the opportunity to really use some of the same language and to have amazing outcomes as a result of this. I am super, super excited about it. A couple of things. I just want to say that I anticipate a very active workshop. This is not passive. I want you to engage. I want that chat box to stay busy. I will answer as much as possible. If I miss anything important, I know that Alicia and some of our other IT people will, and like Gabby, will help point out questions, because, you know, it can be a little tricky going back and forth, but I want you to be fully engaged and to ask any question you have. And I want to start out by saying, we have just a couple of community norms, and I want this to be a safe space. Talking about race can be scary. And you signed up for this workshop, and I'm so excited because so many times even the workshops can be scary. Have you ever attended like a racial equity or cultural competence workshop where you walked away feeling worse than when you came? You know, that kind of shaming and blaming and, oh my gosh, the problem is so big, how do we ever solve it? We don't want that. I want you to know this is a safe space, and we allow each other the space and grace to grow. And why is that so important? This is important because I promise you, you are going to make mistakes. I want you to expect it, and I want you to be okay with it, because you're going to say something, do something, and you say, oh, I didn't know. Oh my gosh, I didn't mean for that to come out that way. How did that happen? So I want you to allow each other the space and grace to grow. And I want you to be very forgiving of yourselves and stay on this journey, even when you make mistakes. So a couple of things here. We have to talk about race because it's a mess right now. Our society is more divided than we have ever been in my lifetime. And it's just a mess, which is why we're here. But I want us all to understand that the mess we're in is not a mess we created. The racial inequities are historical, started way back in the 1600s, has been building up ever since. We did not create this mess. And although we didn't create it, we have a responsibility to correct it. We have the power and the responsibility to change hearts and minds so that the children you have in your classroom today will not have to be protesters in the street tomorrow. That the children in your classroom today won't have children who will be protesters tomorrow. And when I say that, I really mean it from the bottom of my heart, because my grandfather, he worked for the civil rights movement. And then my dad, he worked with the whole, well, he worked civil rights. My grandfather as well, my dad on the tail end of that. And then I came along with the Black Power movement. And now my son right now is a community activist and a community organizer. And I'll never forget the day that my son looked at me and he said, "Mom, my great grandfather fought this battle. My grandfather fought this battle. You and my dad fought this battle. Why am I fighting it? Will my children have to fight it?" And I want our answer to that to be no, that we will take care of this in our lifetimes. Let's not leave this legacy for our children. But because we didn't create it, there's no blame and no shame. No one's going to say, "You're the problem. This is because of you." Where we are today is what we inherited. Although sometimes we just want to pick it up and throw it back. We say, "No, thank you. No, thank you, please," and throw it back. But we can't. We have it, and we can do something with it because we have a personal and professional responsibility. I put professional development, I just caught that typo, sorry, to correct it. I also want you to know that where you are is okay. For some of you, we're talking about talking to children about race in middle school. You're going to hear me say that children notice race early in infancy. And some of you might think, "Oh my gosh, they notice that early and I'm just having these conversations." Where you are is okay. It's absolutely okay. But when we know better, we have to do better. And that's why we're all here today. So why should we speak to children about race, and how in the world do we do it? First, we have to talk to children about race. Oh, and by the way, I use children for everyone under 18. And that's a personal, intentional decision for me. Some of you have heard of the term adultification. And what happens is that children of color, especially Black and brown boys and Black girls, are adultified very early. Research shows that even teachers with knowledge of child development, they will misjudge a Black boy and a brown boy's age by 4.5 years. Even middle school teachers, 4.5 years because of adultification. And for Black girls, they're thought to be more mature and needing less nurturing than other girls their age. And this robs the child of a chance just to be a kid, just a chance to be a 12-year-old. You all know how nutty 12-year-olds are, that how their brains aren't fully developed. And when you ask them why they did something and they say, "I don't know," it's because it's true. They have no idea why they did it, and how they lack impulse control. So I want to reclaim childhood for kids and always remember their children. Excuse me. My niece calls her baby little man. And I said, "Let him be a boy. Just let him be a little boy for now." So anyway, you'll hear me say children. And even when I say that, I'm talking about middle schoolers too. So some are afraid that children are too young, while others fear that talking about race might actually promote racism. You all probably have heard people say that. "You keep bringing it up, you keep race baiting, we don't need to talk about this. If you don't talk about it, children won't notice." Nothing could be farther from the truth. Actually, the failure to talk about racism and race contributes to racial inequities. Our silence feeds it. But how do we talk to them about race? How do you even broach these topics? And I want you to know it all begins with you. It starts with you. And that's the hard part, because we don't just wake up not talking about race and say, okay, today we're going to have that conversation. So let's talk about, I don't know how that happened. Let me go back to where I was. It all begins with you. So first thing we have to talk about is implicit bias. And we have to talk about this because even though we believe we see and treat people as equals, unconscious bias influences how we view people and how we behave towards them. So let's just define implicit bias. An implicit bias is a mental process that results in feelings and attitudes about people based on race, age, and appearance. And it is based on an unconscious process that we're not aware of, and it results in messages that we've received over the course of our lifetime. So I just want you to imagine that your core area is like an internal recording. I used to say record player, but then my college students are like, what are you talking about? So it's an internal recording. And I just want you to imagine that on that recording is everything you've ever seen, heard, smelled, experienced. Everything is recorded. The problem with the recordings is that you don't know what's there. You have no idea what was there. There are things that happen to you in your life that you have no memory of, but yet it can influence how you feel about things. Now, some of you have returned. Some of you attended the preschool session and the elementary school session. So if you're here for a third session, you're going to hear some of the same stories. So I just want to warn you. And if you're here and you've attended the others, I want you to stick with it because it is tailored for this audience. So those of you who heard me before, I don't want you to say, oh, I heard that, I'll just hang up, because it is customized for middle schoolers. But some of the stories are the same. So the story here, when I want you to understand what's on your recording, is the story that I tell about a dog and a mother and a child. So I want you to imagine that you are a baby and your caregiver is walking in the park with you in her arms, took you out of the stroller and just walking with you in her arms. And anybody who have a 4-month-old is smiling. Anyone have a 4-month-old at home? They're smiling, they're so friendly, no stranger anxiety yet. And you're just smiling and giggling and talking to the baby, and all of this wonderfulness comes a big, giant brown dog. We don't know the breed, but it's just big, and it runs up to your mom really fast, starts barking and showing its teeth. Your mom or your caretaker or whoever's holding you is terrified. They start screaming and kicking and holding you tighter and holding you up so the dog can't get you. And the dog is barking and she's screaming, and there's a lot of chaos. Someone runs up, snatches the dog by the collar, puts him on the leash and leaves. And your caretaker is calming down. But for a minute there, your hearts were together, your hearts were beating fast, and it was a very, very scary situation. But you don't remember that. You're 4 months old, you went back, she went back to her walk, you were fine, no one was hurt, never even talked about it again. But here you are at 24, and you're walking through a park, and all of a sudden, there's a big brown dog. And you have a visceral reaction to this dog. You are terrified of this dog, and you don't know why. No one ever told you about the incident in the park when you were 4 months old, but your body remembers, your recording remembers, and you respond in a very negative way to this dog simply because of what's on your recording, and you don't even know why. That's how implicit bias works. We respond to what's recorded, and we have no idea what's there. And implicit bias also supports stereotypes. This is a Rosemariism. I believe that many of our biases come from the media. Of course, they can come from family, they can come from school, but we are just being bombarded with stereotypes about each other, about other people, about people who don't look like us, who don't speak the languages. And we're more segregated today than we have ever been. So those stereotypes become reality because we don't get to know people personally. So implicit bias can be based on race, age, appearance, anything that we see as different from us. So the categories of bias can exist in cultural dimensions, ethnicity, ability, gender, identity, sexual orientation, any of the isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, and personal contextual factors, genetics, family history, lived experiences, relationality, our family, friends, community, and heritage, and systemic factors that are historical, sociocultural, political, economic, and bias can exist in any of these and all of these. But today we're going to talk about racial bias. Today's conversation is going to be about race. And people say to me often, they say, you know, Rosemarie, it's not only about race. And they're right. It's not only about race, but it is always about race. Always, always, always. Because on every single indicator of child well-being, Black and brown children are at the bottom. And this is the biggest problem that we have in our country. And this is the problem that we are least likely to talk about. Do I have any special educators? Anyone here working in special ed? Just drop it in the drop box for me. And I ask that because my son went through special ed as a preschooler. He staffed out. Okay, I see you, Brina, and Laura, and it was during his screening and diagnoses that I found out that when he was diagnosed with sensory integration processing disorder and auditory processing, I found out that I too have it, and that's going to make sense when I tell you a story a little later. But in showing you how race impacts everything, I just want to share a story about my son and his disability. So the way that his sensory integration processing and auditory issues showed up as a teenager was quite different from the way they were when he was in preschool. So the way it shows up as an adult for both of us is the way that we get lost. For those of you who may not know what sensory integration processing disorder is, it's the way that your body takes in sensory information, processes it, and then uses it for life. So for instance, anybody here have a ceramic stovetop, you know, one of those stoves where the stove can be on, but it doesn't turn red? You know what I'm talking about? So the way that your sensory integration issues work is you walk up to the stove and you feel that it's warm. So that's your senses, your brain took in that information. Hey, the stove is warm. And your body uses that information and processes it. The stove is on. Okay, I feel heat. The stove is on. Let me back up or let me turn it off. And then you use that for life. So your body took in, stove is on, you did something about it, and you use it for life. So that's how sensory processing works. But for people like me, there's a disconnect in the way your body takes in information, processes it, and use it. For instance, you fall, you skin your knee, you feel pain. I don't feel a lot of pain. I broke my knee and walked on it for 3 weeks before I ever felt it. And I didn't really feel it. My doctor says, anytime you say it felt funny, that's how other people experience pain. I broke my tooth to the jawbone, went to the dentist and said, oh, my tooth feels funny. He goes, ah, and he doesn't cuss. My dentist actually cussed when he saw it. He went, oh, crap. And I didn't feel a thing. So I don't know if you've had children like that, but it's the way you process information. But anyway, back to the story. So one of the main ways that we experience the sensory integration issue is the way we get lost. And when we get lost, we get really, really lost. Not just, oh, which way do I turn? And a lot of children and adults with sensory processing issues can't tell their left from their right. So keep that in mind as well. So anyway, it's like, which way do I go? I don't know. But when we get lost, it is physiological. You don't know where you are in space. You hyperventilate. You become lightheaded, totally disoriented. It's a physiological response. And most of the time you need help to come out of it. So here's my son in Lone Tree, Colorado, right down south by Highlands Ranch near the Park Meadows Mall, small town of Lone Tree, very affluent, very white, and very conservative. So there's a hiking area around the corner from our home. And he can walk there. He can walk up the street and go. But this day he decided that he was going to drive. He says, Mom, I'm going to drive to the Bluffs and meet my track team. And I'm like, well, why are you driving? Well, we might go eat afterwards and I don't want to have to walk back home to get my car. Okay, 5 minutes tops, he can drive that route. He gets in the car and he goes. I thought nothing of it until 15 minutes later. My son called me. Any of you ever hear your child, the way they say mom, and you know it's trouble? He goes, Mom. Heart drops. But then I thought, okay, he's alive. He said my name. He called Mom. So anything else I can deal with. Mom. I said, son, what is it? Where's the Bluffs? I'm like, where's the Bluffs? He left 15 minutes ago. And I said, oh, it's okay. He goes, I can't find the Bluffs. I said, it's okay, son. I'm on my way. I'll find you and you can follow me back. I am grabbing my keys. I'm grabbing my purse, putting on my shoes, racing out of the house because I know I have to get to my son. And I said, honey, now he's 16, 6 foot, about a little less than 6'1", 6 feet, highly agitated. I said, son, just tell me where you are. I don't know. I said, okay, you don't have to know. I'm on my way. And I said, just tell me what you see. Nothing. Like, okay, I got to find this kid. He's highly agitated. How am I going to get to him? And I said, it's okay. I'm on my way. I'm on my way. Just breathe. Yeah, but I don't know where I am. I said, it's okay. You don't have to know. I'm going to find you. And I said, but if you can just look out the window and tell me what you see. Cows. I'm like, cows? Where are cows? And I thought, where did he go? But that turned out to be a good clue because I knew not to turn towards downtown, that I should go towards Castle Rock. So I'm driving and I'm thinking, cows, where can he be? 15 minutes away, 8 minutes in, couldn't find him. And I thought, okay, 10 minutes, finally, I found him. And here's this big kid, he gets out of the car, he falls into my arms. He goes, thanks, Mom, thanks. Now I'm telling my girlfriend the story who's white. And she goes, Rosemarie, why didn't you just call the police? The police were my fear. That was my fear. My fear wasn't that he was lost and his sensory integration processing issues kicked in. My fear was that he was a 6-foot Black man who was highly agitated, couldn't tell you where he was or how he got there, and couldn't answer any questions. You see the difference there? So my fear was race. It wasn't his ability at the time, although both of those existed at the same time. It's not only about race, but it's always about race. David said, my adult student is aging out and will work to support him with sensory social anxiety and emotional interactions. It's been a constant since he was 2, and we learn to support who he is. Absolutely, absolutely. So we have to talk about bias. And like I said before, we didn't create this. We inherited bias. We are all biased individuals. Racial bias exists in our unconscious minds. And this yellow area I want us to pay attention to. Unconscious attitudes are less egalitarian than we explicitly think about race. And I love this one because it speaks to our hearts. What it's saying is that we all want to believe we're better than this. We all want to believe we're better. And it's because we all want to be better. And that's a very, very good starting point. But our refusal, and I'm going to change that, our inability to talk about and confront issues of race reinforces the racial bias. So it's important for us to understand the causes of implicit bias so that we can do the intentional work to mitigate the negative consequences. So I'm going to use a visual. I love this, the ladder of inference. And many of you have seen this before. I like to use it just to show how fast we engage in implicit bias. Now, I want to say that implicit bias, we're most influenced by implicit bias at times that we are afraid. It's fear when we don't have enough information, and ignorance, and when we have to make snap decisions. Fear, ignorance, snap decisions, recipe for being influenced by implicit bias. But anyway, let's look at this ladder. And like any ladder, you climb it starting from the bottom. You select data from what you observe. Then you add meanings based on the data you observed. And the meanings that you add are cultural and personal. And this is right about the time that you just make stuff up. And then you make assumptions based on the meanings that you added. Then you draw conclusions, adopt beliefs about the world or about a person, and then you take action based on your beliefs. And this happens in milliseconds. You have no idea you're doing it. The minute you meet someone, you size them up. You make decisions about them just upon looking at them. And this process can help us to make the invisible visible. So let me give you an example. One is Rosemarie walks in, she doesn't speak to me. I just want to start out by saying speaking is cultural. There are many of you in this workshop who were explicitly taught to speak when you walk in a room. That your job when you walk into a room is to speak to the people who are already there. That's the way I was raised. If I walk into my mom's house and she's sitting around talking to her friends who are considered my aunties, not only must I speak to them, but I have to hug them. Hi, Auntie Crystal, hug, hug. Hi, Auntie Zona, hug, hug. That's the way I was brought up. If I walked in and said, hey, I would be in trouble, and that would be considered very rude. But on the other hand, some of you were explicitly taught that when you walk in a room, you don't make yourself the center of attention. You don't interrupt. You wait for an opening, and then you interject or you speak. How were you all raised? Just drop it in the drop box. Let me see. Who was raised to speak first? Who was raised to wait? Quiet and observe, wait. A lot of people raised to wait. Speak first, raised to wait. A lot of people all over, everybody talks at the same time. That's my family. Speak and interact. Speak. Do you see where we're all over the East Coast loud, Jared? I see that. All righty. Depending on which side of the family you were visiting. So code switching or family talk. Guests, don't interrupt. Wait, respect. Speak first, loud. Do you see how we're all over the board? Look at this. Look at how different we are just in how we enter a room. Imagine the cultural disconnects that can occur. I can tell how people were raised just the way they enter a meeting, especially if they enter late. People who were raised to wait and it was respectful not to interrupt, they walk in very quietly and sit down. People who were raised like me, even when they're late, they walk in, hey, hi, good to see you, with their Starbucks. So cultural disconnects can occur simply in terms of how we enter a room. So let me give you an example. Someone said, definitely speak first. So I select data. Rosemarie rushed right past me without even speaking. Did you see her? Like she didn't see us here. I add my own personal and cultural meaning. You know what? She has an attitude and she doesn't like us because she's the principal. And I doubt if she even knows our name. Most of the time she acts like we're invisible. And then I make assumptions. She thinks she's better than us. You know, I get it that she's our boss, but goodness, can't she speak? Just bother to speak. And I draw conclusions based on my beliefs. She'll never treat us fairly because she doesn't even like us or respect us. And people go up the ladder just like that. And I use this example because it happened to me. Just once, walked in, and you know, I was the director of the school, totally preoccupied with something else, or rushing to somebody in my office waiting for me, didn't see people, and all of a sudden this ladder went up the ladder, and it took a little while to repair the damage. But people go up that ladder very quickly. Here's another one. The observable data is a big boy. let's say he's a big Latinx boy, big Latino. That boy is big. Gosh, they said he's 12. He looks like he's 18 and he looks like he's rough. Oh my goodness. And then I'm going to add my own personal and cultural meaning. You know what? I spoke to him and he didn't even speak. I could not get a smile out of him. I think he has an attitude. I'm going to have to watch him. And then I make assumptions. Oh, he's so big, he's probably going to be aggressive with the other children because he's not friendly at all. And as big as he is, if he gets upset, he'll probably hurt somebody. And then I draw conclusions based on my beliefs. Oh, I know we're going to have to put him on a behavioral plan because he's big, he's aggressive, and he's not friendly. Do you see how fast you can go up that ladder? And we do it all the time. I have teachers here. How many of you know how badly we discriminate against boys? How many? I have principals here. When people get their class list, what's the number one first complaint? I have way too many boys. Gosh, I have 25 and 18 of them are boys. This is too much. Can you break this up? We already come in with biases against boys. Want us to be aware of that. So when I talk about going up the ladder, we all go up the ladder. And I put this slide in here because sometimes I'm tempted not to tell this story because it's so hard for me to share, but I want to share with you my personal, most painful and shameful experience going up the ladder. And this actually happened about 3 years ago, maybe a little longer now. But it was when my son was in college. My son went to Howard University in Washington, D.C. It is an HBCU, Historical Black College and University. And actually, our vice president, Kamala Harris, graduated. And I was reminded that she was actually the commencement speaker when he graduated. I'd forgotten about that. But he's at Howard after living here in Lone Tree. And Lone Tree is probably very much like Erie. You know, we're not preoccupied with locking our doors. We feel safe most of the time. The Lone Tree Police Department a couple of years ago had to put out a bulletin. Please take your purses in Safeway when you go. Stop leaving them on the seat. Hide your laptop. You know, people are stealing things because we just don't think anybody will ever steal or hurt us. My son had never feared for his personal safety ever, but all of a sudden he was going to leave the safety of Lone Tree where he's lived his whole life, except for a couple of years in Parker, and go to Washington, D.C. in an area that had the reputation of not being safe, an urban city that had a really bad reputation. It was very scary for us. But we wanted him to have this experience, especially after being in a predominantly white environment. So an HBCU was just something he was so looking forward to. So we let him go. And his first 2 years, oh my gosh, he grew by leaps and bounds. Just amazing. It was the best decision we'd ever made. Between his sophomore and junior year, he decided he wanted to live off campus. Fear, ba-boom, ba-boom, off campus. Are you crazy? No way. No. He developed a PowerPoint presentation, showed us all the money we would save, what he would do, how he would do it, everything. And of course, we said, okay. And once we said, okay, I went into mama bear mode. We didn't want him to take his car down there. If you've ever driven in Washington, D.C., you know why. And so we had to find him a place close enough to campus, but safe enough, and where he can walk and where he eats all organic foods because he has eczema and he controls it through his diet. So he had to be close to the organic food store and campus, just a lot of variables. And finally, I found the perfect house that he would share with 4 graduate students. And he's an old soul, so that was great. So he went to the house, he met his future roommates. They loved him, he loved them. We're ready to sign the lease. He's ready to go, but I wasn't. I needed to see this place. So I hopped on a plane so I could meet the roommates, see the house for myself, and I'm ready to go. So remember, I have sensory integration processing issues. You know how I get lost, right? So I put the address in the GPS and I'm driving and I'm feeling really, really good. And I'm about to make a left turn and I feel great because I see the pink house. So I know I'm on the right street. And I turned, made my left turn, and I'm driving down the street and I'm about to pull up to park. And as I'm parking, I looked up, and standing on the porch of the house next door was a man, a rather large, very dark, Black man. And I looked at him and I went straight up the ladder. I took one look at this Black man standing on his porch. He had on a white t-shirt, jeans. He wasn't sagging. He had a belt, but he had a belly in the, his belt was under the belly. So amazing. I remember every single detail. And I looked at him and my first thought was, oh no, my son can't live here. It's too dangerous. And my next thought was, I hope the housing office is open so I can go get his dorm room back. And my third thought, remember, this is milliseconds. My third thought was, what the heck just happened? Did you just look at this Black man and decide that the neighborhood was too dangerous for your Black son? I could not believe I did it. Once I realized what I'd actually done, shame washed over me in a way that I'd never experienced before or since. I was absolutely ashamed of myself, and this feeling of unworthiness just poured all over me. It was so strong that I put my hands on the steering wheel, put my head down, and I sobbed. I just cried and I just beat myself up because I kept thinking, this is your life's work. This is what you fight against. This is what happens to your son. This is what happens to your dad. How could I look at a Black man and believe that the neighborhood was too dangerous for my Black son? And I'm just beating myself up. And how can you now face people and do this work? Are you going to be a hypocrite? How can you live with what you just did? And I'm just crying my eyes out, just crying. It was heartbreaking to know I did that. And I'm sitting there crying, and all of a sudden I realized I've been sitting for a while because I looked up and the guy was looking at me like, what's going on? And when he saw that I was crying, he raced down the stairs, came up to the window, and I'm thinking, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. You know what I wanted to do? I wanted to take off, and I just wanted to leave. And I even thought about it. He doesn't know you. You don't know him. This is a rental car. Just leave. But I didn't. And I stayed. And when this happens to you, not if, but when it happens to you, I want you to stay too. I want you to stay and face the fear, face whatever that was. And I did. And but I kept thinking, get out of the car. But what's my excuse? What's my excuse for sitting here crying in the car? What am I going to say? What am I going to say? So I got out. He goes, ma'am, are you okay? I said, yes, I'm fine. He goes, but you're crying. What's the matter? And I said, I think I'm lost. And I have sensory integration processing disorder. And when I get lost, I get really lost, like disoriented and this and that. And I'm just explaining. He goes, calm down, calm down. I know what sensory integration processing disorder is. Another bias. You do? Because I'm thinking, how would you possibly know that? And he goes, yes, I do. But what address are you looking for, ma'am? And I said, I gave him the address. He giggled. He goes, you're right here. Here it is right next door. I'm like, oh, thank you. By this time, I'm fine. And we start to talk. And I said, my son's a student at Howard and he's going to be living here. Are you a student at Howard too? And he goes, uh-huh. And I said, well, what does that mean? Either you are or you aren't. He goes, well, I'm a resident at the hospital. I go to the medical school. I'm affiliated with the medical school. And I thought, oh, okay. I would have missed that. I would have missed his brilliance and his compassion, which also explained why he knew what sensory integration processing disorder was. But he didn't have to be a future doctor to earn my respect. He could have been a janitor or a Walmart worker or a bus driver or even homeless. But what he should not have been was deemed dangerous simply because he was a Black man standing on his porch. And I did that. Dr. Rosemarie Allen, who has been engaged in equity work since forever, I did it. I did it because I too am influenced by implicit bias. And let me tell you something, no one could have ever told me that I was capable of it. Because first, I have to be honest with you, I absolutely love Black men, love them. My daddy, my uncles who raised me, my uncles were amazing. I had this circle of Black male support that was unimaginable, and each uncle had a name for me. Senorita Sophisticat, Peter Rabbit, Sugar Puddin'. Those were the names my uncles who loved me doted on me. And my husband, my son, my brother, my cousins. I never had a bad experience with Black men. So how did that happen to me? But it happened. It happened and I had no idea it could. So if it could happen to me, imagine how it could happen to you. And these aren't the stories we share. This is one of my greatest shames. I'm ashamed of it, but I've learned to forgive myself. And if there are any Black or brown men on this call, I want to ask for your forgiveness because I know that this is your life. What I just shared is how you are experienced in the world every day. And this is what we do. So we have to recognize what we're capable of because aware is halfway there. We form implicit evaluations based on stereotypes, inaccurate information on stereotypes. It makes it hard for us to live up to our values of equity and fairness. It creates real world barriers to equity. I could have just driven off. If I wasn't already aware, and if I weren't already engaged in this work, I could have been driving, saw the pink house. Oh, there it is. Turned, pulled into park. And without examining how I was feeling, I could have said, oh, this feels too dangerous. I don't think I'm going to stay. I think that we'll just go back and get his dorm room back and we'll try again next semester. We have to be aware. And how do we heighten our awareness? There are two things. So these are your two takeaways. Notice and wonder why. Notice your reaction and wonder why you're reacting. Notice this neighborhood feels dangerous. And then wonder why. Why? Why does this neighborhood feel dangerous? When I was at the state, I had to go to Yuma County. Anyone familiar with Yuma? Someone planted a seed in my head. They said, Rosemarie, I don't know, because I was going to go and stay all night because my keynote address was at 8 a.m. This was about 10 years ago. And I asked one of my staff members, I said, can you give me the name of a hotel to stay in? And it took her 2 weeks. And finally she goes, Rosemarie, I don't think you should stay there overnight. And I said, well, why not? And she goes, I need you to trust me. I don't think you should stay. You should get there that morning. And finally she said, there are lots of racist people there and I don't think you'll be safe. So what I didn't realize was to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning, I still had to leave at dark to drive. And I'm driving and I'm white knuckling it. And then I began to see all these things. I saw a Confederate flag. I saw stereotypic gnomes in the front yards and I'm white knuckling it. I'm just like, let me get to Yuma. Let me deliver my keynote. Let me get out of there. I delivered my keynote address and I left and I got home. And like I said, that was about 10, 12 years ago. And for 3 years, I kept saying, I'm never going back to Yuma. I'm never going back to Yuma. And then finally it hit me. Nothing happened to you in Yuma. Nothing. As a matter of fact, everyone there was really amazing and polite and wonderful. But because that bias seed was planted, I reacted to it. And because I expected to see racist things, I looked for them. And then I saw them. So we have to be aware of how biases work because we're all biased. Yes, you too. But like I said, aware is halfway there. But we have to talk about the issues. And this is why we're here tonight. We have to talk about it. And we have to talk about race. But it's not comfortable. We don't like to. We become so politically correct that we don't know what to say, when to say it, how to say it, who to say it to. Do I say Black or African American? Do I say Latino? Do I say Hispanic? Do I say Spanish? When I first moved to Colorado, I was told by my boss not to ever use the label Mexican because that was racist. I'm like, but they said they were Mexican. She goes, I don't care. You can't say it. I was so confused. I said, well, what do I say? She goes, say Spanish. But I'm from California and I'm thinking, they're not from Spain. But I was so terrified of getting in trouble for years, I didn't say it until finally I thought this is ridiculous. If a person says they're Mexican, then I can say they're Mexican. And that was okay, but we're scared and people make us afraid. And we don't know the current labels. My girlfriend who was labeled Asian. We went to lunch with my other girlfriend who's Afghan. She's from Afghanistan. And she told me, she goes, so my girlfriend who's Asian said, Rosemary, you know, I'm Chinese. And I said, okay, I know. She goes, no, really, I'm Chinese. I said, I know. She goes, no, I am Chinese. My parents are Chinese. My grandparents are Chinese. My great-grandparents are Chinese. I am Chinese. And I don't know who decided I was Asian, but I am not Asian. I'm Chinese. I'm like, okay. And then my girlfriend, Fahima, who's Afghan, she goes, well, I'm Asian. Okay, now you just messed me up, girl. Because I thought you were Afghan. She goes, of course I am. But on what continent do you think Afghanistan is on? When I check a box, I check Asian. So now I'm really messed up. So you know what happened. Now I'm afraid to say Asian. So we just go through this and we don't know what to say because we don't want to offend. Let me give you an example. This is my family. See my husband, just like that, look just like that man standing on his porch. But my husband was born in 1949 and he is turning 72 this year. I was born in 1959 and I'm turning 62 this year. My husband was born in the segregated South. When he was born, what race do you think was listed on his birth certificate? Go ahead, use your chat box. Remember, this is a safe space, so you can guess. Come on. Not yet. No, not yet. Oh, Gen B. Gen B has it colored. My husband is labeled as colored. Every now and then I'll say, come on over here, big old colored boy. I can say that, you can't. It's really important to know what you can and cannot say. Now it's interesting because my students at Metro State, they hear people of color and now they're starting to say colored people. You don't ever want to say that. Colored people is very derogatory, very offensive. We can say people of color, but you can't say colored people. On the same page? All right, so my husband's colored. So 10 years later, when I was born, what do you think I'm labeled as? Someone said it, Susanna and Luisa. Nope, I am Negro. 24 years later, when my daughter was born in 1983, she is, Libby said it, she's Black. And almost 12 years later, in 1994, so 11 years later, my son, what do you think he is? Yep, Tiffany, he's where am I? He is African American. And that's one family living today. One family right now with all these labels. No wonder we're confused. We are confused. We don't know what to say anymore. But I do have to tell you, when you have a relationship with someone, you can ask them how they identify. And people ask me that, Rosemarie, do you prefer Black or African American? I really don't have a preference, but if I were forced to choose, I would choose Black simply because it connects me with Black people all over the world. But I really don't have a preference. And we don't like to talk about race because it feels personal. White people are afraid they're going to be blamed, that you're going to be blamed for all the ills of the world. Any white men in this workshop today, that's a fear because white men have been blamed for everything. There's a wonderful TED Talk by Theo Wilson. He goes undercover as a white supremacist, and he finds out that the white supremacists and this Black man have a lot in common, and both of them have been blamed for all the ills of society, and that doesn't feel good. So people are afraid they'll be blamed, and then people of color are terrified that they're going to be accused of playing the race card. And then people get defensive, especially because we don't talk about race. We like to pretend it doesn't exist. We've been taught this racial etiquette. It's not polite to discuss things that make us uncomfortable. Or we have been taught to be race neutral, or what people call colorblind. To say, I don't see color, I just see children. I don't see color, I just see students. But we all know that that's not true, that we see people. But I want you to reflect. I want you to think about, were you taught to be colorblind? I want you to think about your first experience with race. And if you're comfortable talking about race, And as you're thinking about that, Gabby, let's put our poll up. So we're gonna just have a quick poll. So as you were growing up, did your family discuss race? What? Never, seldom, or frequently? Go ahead, fill it out. Choose one of those. And you can choose it on the poll. Let's go to the poll. Do you all see the poll? Okay.
It should have popped up right on your screen for you to use. If you're on a phone, it may have covered your whole screen up, or you can tap at the bottom to access the poll right there. We'll leave it open for a couple more seconds. Alrighty, I'll leave it up for just 5 more seconds and I'll close it. There you go.
Okay. So it looks like we're kind of all over the board, but for the most part, about 76% of you, your family never or seldomly talked about race. And I applaud you for being here so that you can learn strategies to talk to your own children about race. Thank you so much. Gabby, we can go ahead and close that. So we don't have a lot of experience talking about race, and many of you may have adopted this colorblind ideology. But when we use this idea about being colorblind or race neutral, issues of equity are avoided. And it promotes this fallacy that people are beyond race and racism and bias, and it ignores disparities. And then we begin to blame the behaviors on communities of color. And that's one of the reasons that it's so very dangerous. We see color, we see race. Every one of you who logged on today noticed that I was a Black woman. And that's great. I want you to notice. I want you to see me because everyone wants to be seen. I mean, I went through the trouble to put on makeup and false eyelashes so I could look cute. And I want you to notice. Everybody wants to be seen, honored, and valued. No one wants to be invisible. So when we engage in colorblind ideology, it contributes to inequity by invalidating the experiences of people of color. And then we also have to be aware of culture blind ideology. And this is when we ignore people's culture. But everyone has one. We are all cultural beings. We have to recognize the culture we bring with us. And white people must also recognize they have a culture. Why do I pull this out? Because in the 80s, early 90s, we made a huge mistake when we began to really push multicultural education, multiculturalism, and diversity. We defined everything multicultural and diverse as not being white. And that was a mistake because we're all cultural beings and we have to recognize that. And when we see ourselves as cultural beings, then we can get out of this practice of normalizing some and othering other people. So what do we bring with us? We bring our beliefs and our perceptions, personal identities, and cultural practices. And these are things we don't talk about. There are some things you learned about me. You learned that I'm Black. You learned that I'm a mom. What else? You learned that I speak when I walk into a room. Lots of things. Those are my beliefs and perceptions, my personal identity, my cultural practices. Not only don't we talk about race, but we don't talk about culture. And because we don't know each other. We don't know each other at all. Do you know that I was a full-grown woman before I learned that babies can be born with blue eyes and they change color? I said to my neighbor, your baby's eyes are so blue. And she went, yes. And I think they'll stay. And I'm like, huh? What? I told my husband what she said. He goes, babe, you heard her wrong. I said, no, I didn't because she seemed so proud. He said, baby, where are the eyes gonna go? But I knew I had missed something culturally. So I called my white friend, and I hope that you have friends of other races, nationalities, religions. I called her, and whenever we have these kinds of questions, we start off with white girl question or Black girl question. I said, girl, white girl question, and I told her. And she said, yeah, they change color, they change. said, change what? She goes, they change colors. I said, from like this blue to dark blue? I'm like, how does that work? She goes, oh, honey, they could change to brown. And then I was more confused. I'm like, do they go to sleep with blue eyes and wake up with brown eyes? I mean, how do you get used to that? What happens? I didn't know. And then I learned that hair color changes too. So a baby can be born with blue eyes and blonde hair, and without any intervention whatsoever, can end up with brown eyes and brown hair. Who knew? Not me. Had no idea. But there are things about me you don't know. We don't even talk about black hair. Hair. Like many of you wash your hair every day or every other day. I can't do that. If I wash my hair every day, I would have none. Absolutely none. Not only do I wash my hair about once a week, but after I wash it, I put oils in it. Avocado oil, coconut oil. I put oils in because black hair, and I'm talking in generalities, we have high porosity hair, which means that it soaks up oil and it stays dry. My wash day was actually yesterday, but usually I could just, if it's dry, I can pull it and just pull it off. It just breaks off like straw without any moisturizer in it. So we don't talk about this, so you don't know. And there's a major hair rule for black hair. Anybody know what it is? Major cultural hair rule. Go ahead, drop it in. Don't, Ben, you are right. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Don't act like you're going to touch it. Don't ask to touch it. Don't touch it. I don't know where it comes from, but it has been passed down for generations. Little black girls, when they're little, their mom says, be good, do what the teacher tells you, do your work, try your best. Don't let nobody touch your hair. It's just part of leaving the house. Don't let nobody touch your hair. Don't let nobody play in your hair. I did find a video on YouTube called The History of Black Hair. And I found that the hair, the cornrows that you see, those intricate cornrows, when they were used during the times of enslavement, they were road maps for enslaved Africans who were escaping. And food was braided into the hair for subsistence. So I'm guessing, I don't know, that might be why the don't touch my hair way back from the 1600s. But it's a rule. You do not touch it. And what's amazing is how many people will do so without your permission. It makes me cringe. Do you see how nicely she's telling her you shouldn't do that? I don't know what she said, but I'm guessing it was a lesson. And then you can see the woman's face that she was horrified, like, oh, I didn't know. I wish we could have heard the conversation. But look at her. She goes, oh my, oh, I'm so sorry. But don't touch it. And now, especially teachers and principals, you know that cultural norm. I want you to know that while Black girls make up only 20%, for instance, of the preschool population, there are 54% of those who are suspended. And the number one reason is sassiness. The number two is hair. Suspended for infractions related to hair. So be aware of that. So we have to talk about race. We have to talk about race as adults. And then we have to talk to children about race. But we can't talk about race as we're uncomfortable doing so. So some are afraid children are too young. We talked about that. But some are just afraid that we don't know what to do and how to do it. But I'm just going to give you a brief overview of stages of racial awareness. We know that by the time children are 5 to 6, they have the same level of implicit bias as their adults in their family and surroundings. Black and Hispanic children show no preference toward their own group compared to whites, but on the other hand, white children remain strongly biased in favor of whiteness. That's something we have to understand. But what does this look like in middle school? What are middle school children saying about race? Middle school children use race as an exclusionary and hierarchical tool. In predominantly white schools, many white and some children of color deny that that race even exists. Do you have data on biracial children? Corinne, I don't. And their views, I don't have data on that. But it's worth looking into. And one of the ways that you can get really good research is not just to Google it, but go to Google Scholar and look at some of the peer-reviewed articles. That's the best way to get your research. And forgive me if I'm being condescending, but everyone doesn't know about Google Scholar. And at this age, children claim to be colorblind, but they also see white as normal. So they've normalized whiteness and everyone else is other. Research shows, and I put shoes, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, how racial meanings and identities are reproduced in schools. It was found that when external figures are ambiguous, like for instance, biracial children, white children will categorize them using their language, their hairstyle, or their name to categorize classmates as other. And these racialized labels is how power is transferred and subordination is implied. Because white is normal, and then they categorize other children, and there's a hierarchy there. White children use visible racial signifiers to practice and enforce exclusion. Let's take a look at this.
We're continuing our 360 special report, Kids on Race, The Hidden Picture. Its aim is to study children's attitudes on race and understand how and why they form their opinions. We teamed up with renowned child psychologist, Dr. Melanie Killen, to try to design this study. Now take a look at this. Killen and her team showed 13-year-old children this picture and asked them to describe what was happening. Questions like, what's happening here? Are these children friends? And would their parents want them to be friends? Now, the picture is designed to be ambiguous. What's happening is in the eye of the beholder. Then they showed them this picture and asked the same questions. Now, the only difference between the two pictures, the race of the kids was flipped. Both white and African-American children were tested, and the psychologist showed a similar set of pictures to 6-year-olds. At our request, they also asked kids open-ended questions about race to understand how it plays into their own lives. And as you'll see, the responses were raw. Some of the experiences they describe are shocking. In our first report, we told you that when testing 6-year-olds, the research showed an overwhelming majority of white kids were negative about interracial friendships. The majority of Black children, on the other hand, were positive. But we discovered a lot changes from childhood to adolescence. Take a look. The study found when 6-year-old African-American children were asked about interracial friendships, the majority responded like this.
Carrie was trying to help her.
And how much would they like it if the two were friends?
Really.
But watch how they respond by age 13.
Carrie, she's a bully, so she pushed Abby.
Do you think that Chris and Alex are friends?
No, not really.
The optimism we heard from young Black children fades with age. At age 6, 59% of Black children think the two kids in the picture are friends. By 13, a total flip. 63% do not think they're friends, which matches white teens' attitudes. Our expert says experiences like 13-year-old Jimmy's of rejection begin to explain the disappointing trend. He says a white friend's mom forbade her son to be friends with him.
They end up to say because you're Black, so you can hang out. Her and her son.
Oh, so she kind of very openly said that the reason why her son could not hang out with you and your family was because you guys are Black.
Yeah.
Because of their skin.
Dante was bullied so badly because of his race, he had to change schools.
I've been bullied for like the way I looked and the way of my skin at my previous school that I went to. And they just kept on bullying me. And I didn't like it. I just asked them to stop, like over and over again. And then I tried not to break, but I couldn't hold on anymore. So I asked my mom, can I leave?
Peer interactions are a way to understand.
Our expert, Dr. Killen, says the decline happens because they've been given a sobering reality check on race.
They're getting a lot of negative feedback through elementary school and adolescence. And I think if you have that kind of experience and you have it repeatedly over a number of years, your optimism is going to decline because you've been told, you really don't belong here. You're really not part of us.
Dr. Killen also says anxiety about interracial dating from both Black and white parents can have a profound effect on how their kids view friendships.
Parents of young children do often send messages about we can all be friends with everybody. They do send a positive messages. But by adolescence, they start getting more nervous about this. And they start thinking, well, you should be friends with people like you or like us. How are you? I'm Soledad.
Soledad O'Brien asked some kids about the issue after it came up during their tests.
Do you think your parents would be fine if you decided to start dating a black girl, brought her home?
Honestly, my parents probably wouldn't be too happy because if I was to marry a black girl, you're connected to their family now, and who knows what her family is really like.
So they probably wouldn't.
So, thoughts? So at a young age, there's a lot more optimism, but by the time they hit middle school, and from the research, it shows that their experiences is what creates that shift. And also what the families are saying or not saying. If we don't talk to children about race, they create their own reality based on their own very limited knowledge.
I'm from Haiti and Nigeria. I'm like three things, like I'm Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Black. I'm biracial. I have an African-American father and an Irish-American mom. My name's Wami. I'm Muslim.
I'm Indian, British, Scottish, and American.
My parents are from Venezuela, and I was sharing like one of the foods that we eat, and then I got made fun of. They were like, "What is that? Ew. Oh, ew. What is that?" And like I cried because I felt like, oh, there's something wrong where I'm from. Like maybe like it's bad. Like I'm different.
I am an African-American adopted girl, only child, and I live with my two dads.
I remember when I was younger, I went with my family to a restaurant, and they made us pay in advance just in case we like didn't pay afterwards, and that was kind of upsetting.
You start to notice that people are different. You have comments, they might be racist or they might not be, but by the time you get older, you know that it is racist and you should stop.
I feel a little scared about if I, just walk down the street, cops might just think I'm doing something bad, and then if I'm trying to explain to them, they won't listen and then just start beating me up and doing terrible things to me. I think there's like this anxiety that kind of comes with being biracial, like that kind of eats away at you, like almost like you have to prove yourself like that you're one or the other. Like, for example, like I hear the phrase, "You're not Black," all the time.
People sometimes think that I'm supposed to like talk ghetto or like whatever that is.
Oh, she's uneducated because she's African American. Because I'm Hispanic or Latino, I can't have like a lot of money.
Just this weekend, I went with my friend to Urban Outfitters and we were shopping, and I really wanted to try on this dress. And then this lady that was just like there, she was kind of like watching me, and I'm just like, I'm not gonna steal it or anything.
I think white privilege is the idea that in your everyday life you're getting treated differently and sometimes with more respect, or people just trust you more, or they have certain expectations of you, like you might be smarter or you might be wealthier because you're white. It makes me feel guilty sometimes, even though it's not my fault. Like I feel guilty for having a privilege that like I don't deserve.
If I was ever like the mayor or something that controls the policeman, I would want to go out and look in the neighborhoods where there are people that's very friendly, so you can pick them instead of like these guys that's just doing all this training. It's better to pick people that's more minded with the community than to just pick some new guy and get on the street. Like it's just not gonna work out.
We have like these kids from they're Ecuadorian and they get made fun of because they look Mexican, and they get told on a daily basis, "Oh, you like tacos? Oh, you like churros? How come I saw your mom on the corner selling ices?" Like it's like I feel bad for them personally because I'm like, wow, like they're not, and like even though they tell them
I'm not Mexican, I'm Ecuadorian, they still get teased.
I'm from Haiti and Nigeria.
Although you are not talking about race, your children are. Middle school children may not ask you questions, but they are still seeking answers. Someone said in first and second grade, one of my best friends was a Black boy who lived in the apartment next to ours. For some reason, when I was in seventh grade, a friend asked me to go out with him. I told him my dad wouldn't allow me to date a Black boy. This haunts me to this day. However, after I said that, I started doing my own self-reflection, and I guess rebelled against such racist ideas and became my own person, separate from my parents. And someone else said they remember being so upset and devastated when they were told they could not date a Black boy in high school. And whether you're told this explicitly or it's implied, children see the values that we claim to have by the way that we live them. We have to provide resources to initiate conversations, because at this age, they may not come to you. As a teacher or a mom or a principal or even a mental health person, their biggest source for information are other 12 and 13-year-olds. Do you know how scary that is? That your source for information is your 13-year-old best friend? So we have to provide resources and initiate conversations. We have to offer and encourage resources such as books and movies and other media that discuss diversity and inclusion. Initiate the conversation. You can start with young adult books with diverse representation, because they become very, very popular. More and more books written by BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, are hitting the mainstream. And here are just some examples if you want to take a screenshot. Angie Thomas also wrote The Hate You Give, which was turned into a movie. I know I have some English teachers on here. From the Deaths of Zoe Washington, March, Book 1. But you can look up some of these books. I mean, the internet is full of examples. You can engage in diverse activities. Do things as a family that encourage conversation. Remember when I said the 2-year-old is like the 12-year-old and the 3-year-old is like the 13-year-old? You remember your 2-year-old? No, stop, don't mind. I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. They push you away, but once you're close by, that's your 12-year-old. No, don't drop me off. Don't come to my school. Don't. But stay right here. But stay right here. So they still value your company. So do things as a family that encourage conversation. Pick up a book, read it together, and then make time to talk about what you notice in the book. You all are the middle school experts, so you know how important it is for a middle schooler to know that you think they're smart and grown up. So once you read the book, you can ask questions that give them the power. You know, somebody told me that The Hate You Give really stands for thug by, what's his name? Tupac. Have you heard of him? Duh, Mom. Yeah. And then they'll start talking to you, get the conversation going. Find documentaries and movies and podcasts that discuss different social justice issues, or watch or listen to them together. I knew I was getting older when I tried to watch the Grammys last night and didn't know any of the people who were nominated. I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble. See, because now my children are grown. When they were younger, I had to keep up. Keep up. If you watch the Grammys and there was an artist who won that you don't know, start there where they're interested. Do you know this person? Do you know Lizzo? Tell me more about them. Just show that you're interested. And then you can attend community events when COVID is over, and concerts in your community. Continue to make opportunities to really normalize learning about culture. This has got to be second nature for you, and to respect those cultures that are different from your own. It's so funny that we have so many conversations. What you should know is that communities of color speak to their children very often and very early about race. Very often and very early. There's a a question in the Black community that asks, at what age do I break my children's hearts? Because there comes an age when you have to talk about race, but there comes an age where you have to tell them how they're viewed in society. You have to prepare your children to live in a racialized society, because if you don't, when they experience racism, they internalize it and they think it's something wrong with them. And as the conversations happen very early, for instance, our mall, Park Meadows Mall, it used to have a water fountain right in the middle, and all the children would climb on the water fountain, even though there are signs all around the water fountain that says, do not climb. And my son would want to climb and we wouldn't let him. But the other children climb, and we have to tell him that other children will be able to do things that you cannot do, because you'll be judged differently because of the color of your skin. And anytime we went against it, point proven. White kids all over the water fountain. My son went, my husband let him get up there. What do you think happened? Just that one time, the security guard came and told him to get off. And my son looked at me like, why? And he looked at the other kids, and that was a very vivid reality for him, even at 3 and 4 years old. So we have these conversations early, so we normalize talking about race. Because if we don't, they pick up these social cues. And listen to what this little guy says.
Responses like this might begin to explain.
Do you think it would be as easy to ask your mom to have someone over who's the same skin color and someone over who's a different skin color?
Yeah, that might be hard.
What about it might be hard?
Because all my people in my family are white, and not mostly people that my mom knows and dad knows are black or brown.
Yeah.
Or anything.
So it might be kind of hard to ask your mom to have a friend over who's black or brown.
It's as simple as that. He didn't say his parents said you can't have friends that are black or brown, but he's picking up the social cues. All the people in my family are white. All the people my mom knows are white. All the people my dad knows are white. His reality is so small, so it's implied that he can't have black friends because no one in his family does. So we have to really, really, really talk to children, not only talk to them about race, but we have to live our values out loud. Someone says, we had to break our then 7-year-old's heart as his music teacher chose 2 minstrel songs for his class to sing in their performance. We had to teach him about blackface and also why he wouldn't be singing or performing in his class performance if his teacher didn't pull the songs. Yes, and these conversations, they come up very quickly, very early. The whole idea about Dr. Seuss. You know, we had a big discussion in my class, and someone said, well, you know, it was acceptable at the time. We have to look at the time. How naive are we to believe that it was acceptable? Acceptable to whom? People protested the books back then. They weren't acceptable to Black people and Chinese people. That was acceptable for white people to draw these caricatures and get away with it. So please be careful when you say the times allowed it. The times allowed racism. Even the people back then didn't want that to be true. So when we think about talking to children about race, just like the person here who had to break their 7-year-old's heart, no, we won't be doing this. Eric said, and he knows to be careful about how he's letting the interviewer know. Isn't that amazing? Eric, I was touched by this, the way the child responded. Not really. Even this child at this age is measured about that.
Responses like,
so your children are taking cues. They're picking up on your cues, but also friends of the family. And now by now, you all know that I'm going to be honest. I'll tell you the good, bad, and ugly about me, because I didn't arrive here just being perfect and not biased or any of that. I am influenced by bias just like everyone else. And I have friends and family members who have values that I don't. And we talk about it all the time. My brother was raised and grew up in LA, Los Angeles, and his friends use the N-word freely. And he came to visit us one time and he used it, and I had to stop him. I said, we don't use that word in my house. My children are taught that that's an awful, terrible word. And when they hear it, they know to react strongly and let us know. So we can't casually say that. So you have to be careful about who you're exposing your children to, the parents of your friends, club leaders, the individuals at your student's school. And unfortunately, the teacher the music teacher who chose those songs. And you have to protect your children so that they are picking up the cues you want them to pick up. What are the messages your child's receiving about the world from these people? What messages are they receiving about you and your commitment to anti-racism from the people that you are in contact with? So you also at this age not only have to talk to your children about race and racism and your values towards anti-racism, you have to encourage activism. This is the age where students want to do. Have your child identify an issue in their school or community that they want to change. Show them that you respect their ideas, respect their opinions, and they're interested in helping them find the information and resources they may need. I always taught my children to be social justice warriors, always to stand up for truth and justice. Can I tell you that being the mother of an activist is the scariest thing in the whole wide world? When my son was at Howard, that's when Mike Brown was killed. He called me. He said, "I'm going to Ferguson." I'm like, what? He said, "You need to talk to our pastor." I called the pastor and I said, "What is this? He's going to Ferguson." And my pastor had to calm me down. He said, "Your son was called to do this work, and he loves you so much, he would never go against you. His heart is in Ferguson right now. Don't make him choose. Don't make him be disobedient. We're sending a team. He will be safe, but he is an adult. Don't make him be disobedient." And I didn't. And that was the first step. Then he went everywhere. There's a major uprising. He is there. He's a community activist. He organizes talks between police and the community, and he's on the ground doing this work. The last time here, I tell you, and when they're here, I usually go with them. I didn't last time because of COVID, but you're talking about a crazy mama on Facebook watching every live feed there is. That was me. It was hard. It's still hard, but we can't teach them a value and not let them live the value. So here's some recommendations for talking to children about race. Let me go back to the chat box for a minute. Shout out to Amy Nelson of Boulder Valley School District Equity and Partnerships, starting the Youth Equity Council. Wow, that's amazing. I second that. Been a good mom. Oh, thank you, Louisa. So here are some recommendations for talking to middle schoolers about race. First, examine your own understanding. If race wasn't discussed when you were growing up, do some research and reflect what it brings up for you. Because your kids, especially middle schoolers, will pick up. If you're nervous, if you're not comfortable, if you really don't want to have this conversation, the more you understand what race means and how it permeates our society, the better equipped you are to teach your children about it. I did a workshop on the history of inequities. It's on YouTube. I think if you just go to YouTube and put in Rosemarie Allen, History of Inequities, and it talks about how inequities are embedded in our law, even how race came to be. Because you probably know that race is made up. It doesn't exist. That underneath the skin, we're all the same. It's a social construct that people made up to classify human beings. Right now, if Gabby needed a heart and heaven forbid something happens to me, my being a different race, her being white, my being black, is not a factor in deciding who gets the heart. That's never the question. What's the race? The question is blood type and tissue matching. So race is made up. But anyway, if you look that up, you'll get the history of inequities. So examine your comfort level. And if you're not comfortable, be honest with your kid. A 12-year-old could pick up fear the way little puppies do. Just say, you know what, my family never talked about race. This is new to me. But I don't want you to grow up the way I grew up. Have you ever been really uncomfortable in a situation, a racial situation? And just ask and talk about it. Be comfortable with the terminology, familiar with certain concepts. Race and culture is not synonymous. We talked about that a little bit. be explicit and provide accurate terms. So people of color is a term that's fading because now it's BIPOC, Black Indigenous people of color. And the reason for that is that Black and Indigenous people felt that they were getting lost in the whole people of color when the system of oppression and racism was actually built on Black and Indigenous people's backs. So they pull that out because there's so much uniqueness in terms of anti-Black racism. So for example, oh, and I said that. So know your terms. And if you don't know, let me tell you, this thing right here is the best computer in the whole wide world. Honey, I have never heard of that. Let's look it up and see. And you can investigate together. When your child brings up a topic related to race, don't be afraid to keep the conversation going. This lets children know it's okay to talk about what they notice instead of telling kids to keep quiet or not use particular words or make specific observations out loud. Talk to them. Ask them what they notice and discuss it. Mom, it really bothers me when people speak another language and I can't understand them. Don't you think they should learn English? Well, have you ever thought that they should be comfortable talking to each other in their own language? Why should they speak English for our sake? And you know what else I know? Is that when you think about people all over the world, do you know we're one of the only countries where you could get by speaking just one language? Do you ever wish you could speak another language? Have those conversations. Talk about it. Or if you're not comfortable saying that, say, what comes up for you when you hear that? You know, my daughter said that once. I can't stand it when I go to the nail shop and they start speaking their language. I said, really, honey, tell me more about that. She goes, well, I don't know if they're talking about me because I know my feet are ratchet and I don't want them talking about my feet. So it's not really them talking a different language. You're afraid they're talking about you. You know, have those conversations. Eric says, after reading Caste, I decided not to mark my race on questionnaires anymore. That questionnaire has little to do with my culture, but the science of racism, misbegotten construct. If you have not read this book, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, read it. It is a very, for me, it's funny because I just had this discussion with a friend of mine who's a white male. When I said, oh, that book was hard, he said, yeah, it was really long. And I just smiled. And he said, what? And I said, nothing, because you can't make people see bias if they're not willing to. I said, nothing. He goes, okay. He called me 2 days later. He goes, I heard you. You said the book was hard, and I equated hard with it being long. Your experience was different from mine, wasn't it? I said, yeah, it was. It talk about spirit murdering that I had to put it down 1,000,000 times to pick it up again. It's a great, great book. So next, ask questions, find opportunities to ask questions. For example, when reading a book with your kid, ask why someone is being treated a certain way. Is it because of their skin color? And this could lead to a very rich conversation. Very, very rich conversation. And then you have to model difficult conversations for your children. And this is the hard part. So moms and teachers, this is your assignment. We're getting into the hard stuff now. When you see something, say something, and your kids will learn to do the same. So how do you interrupt bias? How do you interrupt racism? One, my grandmother used to tell me all the time, baby, you have to stop wearing your feelings on your sleeves. Anybody heard that? You can read my face and know what I'm thinking. Stop wearing your feelings on your sleeve. Stop wearing your feelings on your sleeve. People, everyone, wear your values on your sleeve. Live your values out loud. When my children were little, I said, live your life in a way that people know your character. So if someone says something about you, everybody who knows you would say, no, that's not them. I've never drank or smoked or done alcohol. So if someone were to say, Rosemarie was drunk driving, I have 150 million people who would say, not her, maybe someone else, or someone had to pour it down her throat because I know she doesn't drink. If you are anti-racist, live it out loud. Children observe your interactions with others, especially their family members, but teachers also. The way you stand up for your values is a powerful model for how your children and your students can stand up for their values. So here are some strategies. Because you know what? Have you ever been in the middle of a terrible, awful, racist interaction and you had no idea what to say? Anybody? I'm sorry. Yes. So when these things happen, life happens, doesn't it? When these things happen, you have to have a treasure chest of responses already developed. So here are some strategies for you to develop before you get in that situation. Because what happens when you're there, you're neutralized, you're paralyzed. You have no idea what to say, and in a second it's gone. It's moved on. So first, decide that you will be someone who will speak up. You have to say to yourself, I'm a person who will speak up against bigotry. I will not let hate have the last word. Decide who you are. And then develop ready responses that will work in a variety of moments. Screenshot this. You can say, these are just a few. That offends me. I don't find that funny. I'm surprised to hear you say that. Also, speak up against bias in a simple, straightforward manner and challenge bias by taking a vocal stand against it. You can say this, but you also teach your children to say it. What did you mean by that? Why would you say something like that? What point are you trying to make by saying that? Did you mean to say something hurtful when you said that? Using that word as a put down offends me. Using that word doesn't help others to feel safe or accepted here. Ready responses. Make them your own. Teach them to your children, to your students at school and at home. At school, this feels easy for me. To do it in customer service line at King Supers feels hard. Eric, thank you for being honest. Let's play this out. Eric, unmute for a minute. And you're going to have other chances to practice too. Eric, are you unmuted?
I'm unmuted.
Okay. So, Eric, you are the customer. And you're being very, very rude to me.
Okay.
All right, let's go.
Oh man, okay. I'm being rude to you.
Or I can do it the other way. Why don't I do it that way, and then you can use these statements?
Yeah, I just couldn't do that. I mean, it's the not rudeness in me that makes it hard to say if someone was making a comment, a racial comment, in another person in line, that it's being rude to that person, even though it's called for. But in school, it's I'm an assistant principal, I'm a teacher. It's a no-brainer. I mean, that's what we're there for, and it's just. And I was just remarking, why is it so different for me in the real world? But anyway, I'm ready to role play. I'm sorry.
You know what? And I'm going to be talking to you, Eric. I just really can't stand all these foreigners coming over here. Listen to them. They're over there speaking a language we don't understand. This is America, and they should be speaking English. Don't you agree?
I'm really sorry you feel that way. That line, I really appreciated that you gave us. And I'm sorry I went two places once.
No.
I left the customer service line and went to.
Yeah, go ahead. See those responses on the screen? Let's play this out. Come on.
What do you mean by that?
What? Well, don't you hear them? I mean, this is America. They should be speaking English.
I guess I would say something else. At that point, I would say, why is that a necessity that they would need to speak English because this is America?
Absolutely. And what happens usually, we're disrupting it in that moment.
Mhm.
Stopping it in that moment, because let's pretend that your child is in that line with you. It is as important for your child to hear you say that as much as it is for the victims of this to hear you say that. Does that help?
Oh, no, absolutely. I just, I'm the one that made the comment earlier about how you handled your shameful moment. And I guess the idea of I would be shaming the other person. And in school, I can obviously handle that very easily. I'm there to teach. I mean, I'm there to lead. And I guess it just, in some ways, it feels presumptuous to take that stance in the big world where someone, I don't necessarily, I guess maybe it's like your fear of your son going to Ferguson, that fear of what the other person's going to do in their shame is worrisome.
Yeah. And Eric, that's a very good point, because we don't have to use these strategies to shame, but we're using it to interrupt. I'm a person who, I don't believe in disrespecting people ever. I don't think there's a reason.
Right.
But you can say something like, what do you mean by that? They are speaking to each other. Well, I don't even think they should be speaking to each other. And I can say, well, I'm a person who believes that everyone should feel safe. And by saying that doesn't help them to be safe, to feel safe right now. And leave it. Because you're protecting those people, you're modeling for your children, and you stopped it immediately.
Well, and the fact that it feels hard makes it feel all more necessary. I mean, I get that loud and clear in my gut.
Absolutely.
Can I say something? I'm listening to Eric and listening to some of the things that he's saying, and it's reminding me of a moment when I first, I'm a foster parent, and when I first got my little boy when he was 3 months old, a friend came over and she said, I think it's wonderful that you foster this little boy, but I don't think that you should adopt him, because when I ran a daycare, all of the little Black boys and girls that were in my daycare were all very lazy and stupid. And in my mind, I was horrified that she said that to me, not only as a Black woman, but also saying that about a little baby. But I didn't respond to her. I said nothing. And this was almost 4 years ago. And even telling the story now, my whole body is shaking and I'm holding back tears, and not just for saying nothing in defense of myself, but also not speaking up for my son. So listening to Eric sort of struggling through this, I empathize with him, because he's talking about not being able to stick up for other people, but I'm knowing that in that moment I wasn't able to stick up for my child or for myself. So I just wanted to.
Absolutely. Remember I said this is the heavy lifting? This is the hard part. It's hard. I was taught, my grandmother always says, speak the truth in love. And that's what I do, but I've learned to speak the truth, because we have to model this for our children. Remember some of the signs you saw at protest? Silence is violence. Silence is compliance. When you're standing alone as the sole person there, it is overwhelming, overwhelming. So some of these strategies are to interrupt, speak up when it happens, and also to question, like we just said, what did you think about that? What do you mean? Tell me more. And this might help. Eric and David said, thank you for embracing the vulnerability of the difficulty of this conversation. Absolutely. And then educate. Hate isn't behind all hateful speech. Sometimes you just don't know. There are things, remember I said we're going to make mistakes? When my student says, oh, the colored people, and I waited because I didn't want to shame her. And I just said, it's actually people of color. When you reverse it that way, it could be offensive to some people. And I want to make sure that you don't put yourself in that position. She was very thankful. Some people don't know the negative power behind some words. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And while it's not your job to educate, you can refer them to resources. So, echoing, and this is great, and Eric, this helps as well. If someone says something biased and someone speaks up, echo what that person said. So if you're in that customer service line, someone says, why are you not speaking English? And then you say, well, I wonder what you mean by that. And someone else says, yeah, it's really, it really doesn't feel good when we tell people what language to speak. And then when people echo it, again, speaking the truth in love, then it reinforces as well. But as you implement these strategies, I always want you to be safe. Don't speak up in a place that's not safe, where you can be harmed. And again, have your treasure chest of responses ready. Ready, teachers have them ready, parents have them ready, because if not, you're going to miss an opportunity. So what can you say? I'm going to give you just a couple of times to practice. Here's one. And this is from Teaching Tolerance, who now have changed their name to Learning for Justice. Thank you, Amanda Brown, for putting that in the chat box. And all of this came from Learning for Justice. Here we are.
I didn't know what to say. During a service project planting trees at a local park, I heard a group of students laughing, and one of them said, "Why are we doing this? Isn't this what the Mexicans are for?" I didn't know what to say.
How many of you have been there? You don't know what to say. What can you say? Why would you say that? That doesn't help people feel safe here. What do you mean by that? What are the points you're trying to make? You see how that works? So I want you to have situations where you can practice. Sometimes you can just be shocked.
A parent was upset because my classroom is inclusive. He said, "Why does my son have to do group work with a retarded boy? Why aren't they in their own classroom?" I didn't know what to say.
And how many of you have been there and you wish you could press a rewind button because you come up with a perfect comeback about 10 minutes later? So create your treasure chest of responses so that you will be equipped. And Tony Joe, I don't know if you say Tony Joe together, but sometimes you can just be shocked and you can say, "Oh my gosh, I'm just shocked. I don't know what to say right now." So as we have 10 minutes left, I'm going to speed this up. Involve your children in activities to help them learn about their own cultural background. This will help them to develop a greater sense of who they are, which then enables them to create more positive interactions across racial and ethnic groups. The biracial child, when he said his mother was German and something else, I thought that was amazing, because that opens conversations about anyone else here with German ancestry, because they see people as more than one thing. And initiate a book club or conversation with other parents who are interested in learning how to talk to their children about race. We have, I can't see how many, but over 100 people, I believe, right now who are interested in this, who all have middle schoolers. How awesome if you start a book club reading about this, sharing the challenges that you encounter, and normalizing the difficulty about talking about these topics. Eric was a great model for saying, "This is uncomfortable. I don't know how I would feel outside of school doing this." Imagine the encouragement if you all were in a group. It's okay to make mistakes. Many of you did not grow up talking about race, so this is a steep learning curve. You might stumble over your words, you might share wrong information. Let your child know that you're still figuring out how to have these discussions. Also, it's never too late to start incorporating more diversity in your family's home, in your entertainment, in your books, and in the media, and in your interactions with others. At this age, your child's brain is being rewired. They're getting rid of useless information, and they're strengthening their beliefs and values. This is a great time to start or continue racial equity and social justice work. When I moved here from California, I hadn't had as much interaction with white people. I lived in a Black neighborhood, worked at a Black school, and my interactions were very limited. But my friendships with other races and ethnicities happened very naturally because of my children. Because I made friends with my children's friends' parents. Or sometimes the parents, we liked each other and we went to coffee, and then we would get our children together. No matter what age, you can still do that. I'm going to go have coffee with so-and-so. Why don't you come? She's going to bring so-and-so and we can make it a foursome. And you'll be amazed that you can very organically have play dates even in middle school. and I hate that we're going to do this very quickly, but we will. I want to talk to you about a white space. What is a white space? And these are spaces that are overwhelmingly and historically white, such as neighborhoods, schools, universities, restaurants, public places. And these are spaces that are perceived to be off limits to people of color. And when people of color show up, they experience acute disrespect, over-policed, and reminded they don't belong. Here's an example.
Taking my picture. I really don't care.
Okay.
Because you don't belong in this development.
Yeah. Okay.
What's your name?
Live here. I'm not telling you.
I live here. I live here. Okay, where do you live?
Why would we tell you any of this?
Where do you live?
I'm not telling you.
Where do you live?
I'm not telling you.
Okay, not a problem. I'm going to call the gate and have you all arrested.
Okay.
You do not deserve to be in here.
Okay.
So,
what did we even do?
Not only do you not belong here, but you don't deserve to be here. And of course, this is an extreme case, but I have a question. Is your school or classroom a white space? What might that look like? Are children told, this is my classroom, this is my school, you don't belong here, you need to go out, I'll put you out, you do as I say? What are some of the things that we say that might convey that message? Are historically marginalized people experiencing acute disrespect, over-policed, reminded they don't belong? What does this look like? Here are just a few daily acts of bias in classrooms. Mispronouncing, making fun of, and shortening children's names that are not traditionally white. If a parent comes to you and say, these are my two daughters, Adriana and Patricia, then you don't say, hi, Patricia, and hi, Adriana. That's not their name. And you can't say, I don't know how to roll my R's. There's no unpronounceable name. Learn to pronounce children's names. Don't shorten their names because it's easier for you. If you have a child named Ikiko, don't say, can I just call you Iko? No. And if you ask, what are they going to say? No. You're the teacher. You have all the power. So practice, practice, practice. Of course, there are no unpronounceable names, but there are names that take a little more effort. So be aware of that. Assuming a Spanish-speaking Hispanic child is undocumented, that's another bias. Oh, thank you, and spell their names correctly every time, all the time, each time. Absolutely, thank you. And assuming students only eat stereotypic ethnic food, and then having children respect that people eat different foods, like the girl, I think she was from Ecuador, saying that she thought something was wrong with her because of the way children responded. Favoring one group of children over other groups. And we do this without even knowing it. Make sure that you're really aware of who you're calling on, who you're responding to, who you're interacting with. Calling on some children while ignoring others based on race, class, or gender. And assigning roles based on race or gender. And misinterpreting children's ways of being as being defiant. You know, Latinas and Black girls, they're stereotype that they're loud and wild, and they're stereotyped all the time for being who they are. First, we know it's the hair, and then the sassiness, you know? And then assuming people with an accent are unintelligent. And this is not only in terms of other languages, but also regions. Some people from the South, anyone from the South who had to fight through that Southern accent because people say, I've heard people with Southern accents say, people think I'm stupid. Someone said, if my 6-year-old can figure out how to get the Macron over his name on Google and word programs, so can an educator. Absolutely. And now you can Google names for pronunciations, which is amazing. Yes, try it. Another form of bias is stereotyping, or I think I said that Black girls and Latinas is loud and sassy, treating people differently because of their hairstyle. I just want to show you this real quick. I know I only have 2 minutes.
Hey, so glad you're back with us this afternoon. Well, ever since we posted the story of Vanessa Van Dyke's fight to keep her hairstyle and not be expelled, you have been flooding our Facebook page with comments. Look at all of those. Today, Van Dyke continues her fight, and Kalorama has been following her story. She takes a look at how all this started.
The teen has been wearing her hair like this since the beginning of the school year, but apparently the controversy started after she went to administrators here complaining about kids teasing her about her style.
It says that I'm unique.
Vanessa Van Dyke's desire to be different has become an issue at her private school. Her look is being called a distraction. According to school administrators, the way she styles her hair is a violation of student conduct.
They just say you should change your hair. You should make it straight because it's too puffy.
The student handbook at Faith.
I'm going to stop that. And I really take issue with the reporter saying her desire to be different. It's her desire to be natural, to wear her hair the way it grows out of her head. And it's really sad that when she went to complain, they told her to change her hair rather than addressing the bigger issue. Why should a child be forced to do something very unnatural to their hair to be accepted? And I don't know if you know, in order for Black women to straighten their hair, there are 3 ways, and all of them are painful. Straighten it with a relaxer. Sometimes you'll hear it called a perm, with a lye base that burns your scalp seriously. To go through a hot comb with a metal comb on a fire to put it through your hair, or to turn your, what do you call it? Curling iron, not curling iron, flat iron to the highest setting to get your hair straight. I mean, so why should people go through that to be accepted? Just think about it.
Hey, so glad you're back.
So we talked about bias, we talked about isms, we talked about what you can do. I just want to give you a little homework. Controlling implicit bias. You have to deprogram. You have to retrain your brain. You have to expect and accept discomfort. Eric, you're right about that Malcolm X book when he conked his hair. Be intentional about expanding your reality. Intentionality, expand your reality. Seek opportunities to positively interact with other racial groups. Get involved with social groups that are racially and ethnically diverse. Follow diverse authors online, on social media, listen to different podcasts. Someone said that also about unpacking music, all of those things. Share your non-biased anti-racist beliefs with those in your network, and stand up to biased and racist individuals to make the implicit explicit. Whew. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much for being so wonderfully engaged. I love what someone said. I think for the educators here, it's critical to share these learning opportunities with colleagues throughout Boulder Valley School District and SVVSD. Too often parents of color, I'm missing it. Parents of color or parents of children of color are made to feel disempowered against a system that is set up to protect educators. Please speak up at school to your colleagues and even against them. So powerful. I think that's a great note to end on. I'm going to turn it back over to.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Allen, so much. What a tremendous gift you've given us all. We're now so much better equipped to have those ongoing dialogues about race and racism with children, but we're not done. I want to also thank the Boulder NAACP. Thank you to Boulder Valley School District. Thank you to St. Vrain Valley School District. Thank you to our very own Alicia Graves for this gift and for continuing to give to this community each and every day. Thank you for joining us. Please share with your friends. This series wraps up on Wednesday and is geared to our high school age children. You can also sign up for our listserv, view other recordings, and see more resources available at www.erieco.gov/community conversations. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.